At the beginning of the story, our protagonist declared that after 10 years, the Federation Kingdom of the East would fall into the hands of those known as the Five Great Sins. To prevent this downfall, he must become the patron of the children, who will one day grow up to become those same sins. He never expected that his mission would turn out to be such a monumental responsibility. As the story truly begins, Alon reveals that he was once a slave to his work, a mere office worker who toiled for 78 hours a week just to make ends meet. Never in his wildest dreams did he think he would one day transmigrate into a fantasy world and awaken as a noble. He can't help but wonder if this is a blessing, or a cruel joke played by fate. At first glance, life as a noble should have been ideal. But when he asked the butler about the writings inside a book, confusion struck him. Shouldn't transmigrators automatically understand the world's language? He thought. The butler then pointed out that he was holding the book upside down. That's when realization hit him. He wasn't just illiterate. The body he now possessed also had no special ability whatsoever. Still, because of his noble status, he was treated with respect and served well. He enjoyed exquisite meals, and servants even tended to him daily, bathing and dressing him. Yet, despite all this luxury, he couldn't believe that he was now the son of a count, a man whose only purpose was to eat, indulge, and live idly every day. For a while, he thought this must be what it means to live truly comfortably, wealthy, carefree, and unbothered. Except for one problem. He had absolutely no idea what kind of world he had landed in. While being bathed by his servants, one of them mentioned that the other young masters would be returning tomorrow. They advised him to sleep early. Curious, Alan asked who they were referring to. The servant replied that they were his brothers, young Master Leo and young Master Tonio. Then she added, "You speak as if you don't even know your own family, the Palatio family." Alon froze the moment he heard the name. Something about the Palatio family stirred a dreadful sense of familiarity deep within him, one he couldn't explain. The servants panicked when he suddenly sank himself underwater, unable to process the horrifying truth. He had been transmigrated into psychedelia. Psychedelia. The online game he used to play whenever he had free time from his corporate grind. According to him, Psychedelia was a turn-based RPG. No matter what path a player chose, once the five great sins of wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and austerity appeared, the Astelia kingdom would fall, along with its nobles, cities, and everything within it. One of the noble families destined to vanish in the game was none other than the Palatio family. A worthless house often regarded as nothing more than a sub-quest before the main story even began. When Alon finally stepped outside and took in his surroundings, he fell to his knees, trembling. He recognized this place. It was the very location of the sub-quest titled The Investigation of the Palatio Family. According to the quest details, the Palatios were involved in prostitution, illegal drug trade, and even controlled a dark organization known as Avalon. As he knelt before the grand mansion, he muttered repeatedly, "No way. Why here? Why the Palatio family of all places?" The Palatio family, the very first to perish at the hands of the five great sins. And thus, our protagonist was introduced as Alon Palatio, the third son of Count Palatio, an extra-level villain destined for ruin. When he returned to his room, sleep refused to come. "Please, just send me back," he whispered. He'd rather work 78 hours a week again than die 10 years from now. As tears rolled down his cheeks, he clutched a flower and murmured, "What's the point of living rich if I'm doomed to die anyway?" To him, this despair felt worse than being an underpaid corporate worker for 6 months straight. He couldn't help but think, why was he transmigrated without any special power? Aren't protagonists supposed to get perks when they transmigrate? He mused. Then suddenly realization struck. Wait, I know the game's plot. He knew every twist and turn of Psychedelia's story, including what would happen 10 years later. If I know the future, isn't that a power in itself? He thought. From that moment, he resolved to prevent the fall of Astelia Kingdom. His plan was simple yet ambitious, to befriend and protect the future five great sins before they turned into monsters. Since they were still children in this timeline, he believed there was still hope. 2 months later, his knight returned, reporting that he had rescued several orphans from an eastern orphanage that had secretly been a bioweapon experimentation site. The knight had entrusted the orphanage's management to a woman named Utia, and came back to deliver his report to Alon. This knight was none other than Evan Alun Neo, Alon's loyal retainer and personal guard. Alon nodded approvingly, noting that Evan truly lived up to his reputation as a competent knight. Evan asked if that was meant as praise, since his master's expression was always unreadable. "Is that so?" Alon replied with a faint, forced smile. "Evan, I'll be counting on you. Evan simply sighed, muttering that understanding his master's expressions might take a lifetime. Meanwhile, Alon couldn't help but feel awkward seeing his stiff reflection in the mirror, realizing even his facial muscles hadn't transmigrated properly. Still, Evan thanked him for the compliment. Alon explained that in the world of psychedelia, betrayal was common, making Evan a rare gem of loyalty. That was precisely why he had recruited him. Evan then asked if their recent raid had been meant to rescue a girl named Utia, just as Alon had mentioned before. When Alon confirmed, Evan admitted that he finally understood why Alon trusted her. Having worked as a mercenary for years, he said he could immediately tell Utia was no ordinary child. From the moment he found her imprisoned, he could feel a strange, overwhelming power radiating from her. He couldn't comprehend why someone like her would allow herself to be used as an experiment. Evan also asked why Alan didn't bring her to the mansion, wondering if it wouldn't be more beneficial to keep someone like her close. Alon praised Evan's insight, but explained that allowing Udia to remain at the orphanage was part of a greater plan. The truth, he revealed internally, was that Utia Bloodia hailed from the dull blood-cursed tribe, a people bound by contracts with ancient, indescribable entities. In the future, Utia would become the Sin of Wrath, a monster responsible for the massacre of hundreds of thousands across the Estelia kingdom. Yet Alon believed that if she grew up in peace, away from hatred and bloodshed, he could change her fate. In his mind, he had already saved one of the 5 potential destroyers of the kingdom. Still, he needed to conceal his true motives. He told Evan that it wasn't yet time to bring Utia into the mansion. Shocked, Evan asked what he meant, but Alon simply repeated his order and instructed him to ensure no one discovered their secret. He also ordered Evan to provide Utia and the children with full support, and handed him a letter to deliver personally to the girl. When Evan asked what it contained, Alon only said it was a letter of goodwill and concern. In truth, the letter carried a hidden message, one borrowed from the words of an Archbishop NPC in the game's story. It was a phrase tied to Sin of Wrath herself, Utia Bloodia. He remembered her chilling line from the game, spoken before her slaughter began. It's already too late. In the game, that line marked the fall of Estelia, but in this world, he still had 10 years. He vowed to use that time to change the course of fate. It's funny, he muttered, trying to tame a monster with a single phrase. Yet because Utia's tribe worshipped an otherworldly being, he thought there was a chance it might work. Those zealots' minds are beyond comprehension anyway, he mused. Meanwhile, as Utia read Alan's letter, Evan noticed a surge of magic power radiating from her. So intense it nearly made him tremble. The child barely showed any emotion, yet her presence was overwhelming. When she asked if the letter truly came from Lord Alon and why she hadn't been summoned, Evan felt a crushing pressure fall upon him. Only those in the Master Realm could release such an aura. Remembering Alon's words, that it wasn't yet time, he quickly answered, "Lord Alon said this is not yet the right moment." "I see," Utia replied softly. Then she hugged the letter tightly. To her it was more than a message, it was a promise from her master. Suddenly, her aura flared violently, making Evan instinctively reach for his sword out of fear. Then Utia spoke. "I understand now what my master Lord Alon desires." In that moment we are told that she is future Sin of Wrath, the child of the blood-cursed tribe, Utia, the Blood Queen. Later that night, as Alon lay in bed, he reflected that the day had been unexpectedly satisfying. He couldn't believe he had managed to extend his life even a little longer. Even the moonlight seemed to cheer for him. With renewed determination, he whispered, "Time to find the second of the 5 great sins." The next day, while Alon was inside the library, a thick book suddenly fell on his head. As Evan approached, he casually mentioned that he had already rescued the second child mentioned by his master. Meanwhile, Alon still hadn't found any clues about the third boss, the third child among the so-called 5 great sins. Alon then asked Evan if he had managed to take care of the second child properly. Evan nodded, saying that after rescuing the children from the illegal slave market, he hadn't yet finished filing his report, because someone had suddenly kicked open the library doors. That man was none other than the second son of the Count, Tonio Palatio. He sneered and said he hadn't expected to see Alon there. Approaching Alon, Tonio rested his elbow on his brother's head and mockingly asked why someone like him, who couldn't even read, was holding a book. He added that he'd heard Alon had started learning how to read and write lately. Alon stayed silent. Tonio's expression darkened. "I'm talking to you," he said coldly. "I'm your older brother. Answer me." Gripping Alon's head, Tonio pressed down, but Alon, despite the irritation boiling inside him, restrained himself. He thought bitterly that Tonio had always been a pain to deal with. If he had his way, he would have fought back right then. But instead, he knelt before his brother and said politely, If you wish to use the library, I'll leave right away. Tonio only laughed cruelly, then stomped his foot on Alon's head, hissing, "Learn your place." At that moment, a sharp dagger flew past Tonio's face, embedding itself into a nearby cabinet. A cold voice followed. "Vermin like you, Tonio, make far too much noise." Tonio spun around angrily and demanded, "What's your problem?" A tall man stood there, his gaze sharp and detached. "I don't want to see blood in the morning," he said. "You'd best leave the library now." It was the eldest son of the Count, Leo Palladio. But Tonio refused to back down. He grabbed Leo by the collar and sneered, "Before you walk into the library, maybe try washing off that filthy scent sticking to you." In an instant, Leo pressed the dagger against Tonio's throat. "You should leave," he said in an icy tone, "before I lose control of myself. And before you speak again, wash the stench of drugs off your body." The tension between the two brothers was suffocating. Alon slowly crawled out of the library, thinking to himself that the Palatio County, which once played only a minor role in the game, was far more complex and dangerous than he had imagined. The two degenerate brothers fighting for the family's headship, Leo, the so-called prostitution king ruling the underworld, and Tonio, the drug king controlling a massive cartel, were monsters in human form. After the confrontation erupted between them, Alon and Evan hurriedly left the library. As they walked, Alon told himself not to provoke any of his siblings if he wanted to survive. He swore he would live quietly, posing as a weak and useless illegitimate son, a silent observer. Back in his room, Evan mentioned that the second child Alon had rescued didn't seem ordinary either. As Alon lay lazily on the sofa, Evan fell silent, wondering how someone like Alon, who could barely take care of himself, knew about the hidden bioweapon laboratories and the slave market of another kingdom. Deep down, Evan found his master increasingly mysterious. He added that he had already sent the rescued child to a safe place. But Alon knew the truth. The word unusual wasn't enough to describe those children. They were beyond human comprehension. They were beings capable of ending worlds. He explained that the allied kingdom was made up of many nations, and the child they had rescued from the slave market came from the central Kalian kingdom. That boy was none other than the second boss of Psychedelia, Deus Macalian. Sold into slavery and subjected to endless torment, Deus was passed from one place to another, until he eventually became the sin of sloth. Among the 5 great sins, Deus was known for the most terrifying and brutal killing methods. So much so that players of the game felt true fear whenever his arc appeared. Ironically, despite being called the sin of sloth, Deus was the most diligent of them all. Every cruelty inflicted upon him was repaid tenfold. That was why Alon repeatedly reminded Evan to treat Deus with care. As Alon sipped his coffee, he explained that the reason he had sent Deus to an orphanage was because it still wasn't the right time. Evan nodded, seemingly expecting that answer, and asked if the letter Alon had sent to Utia had something to do with Deus. "Something like that," Alon replied. In that letter, he had written about the chaos his brother Tonio caused, as a way to strengthen his connection with Utia. He had also mentioned sending her a sickly child and asked her to take care of him. Meanwhile, under the pale moonlight, Deus stood in the shadows. Utia approached him and called him broken. She observed the scars on his body, recognizing them as marks left by the Black Goat's attacks. "Am I right?" she asked softly. When Deus turned to face her, his eyes glimmered faintly. Utia smiled gently. "Even after everything you've endured," she said, "the great moon still chose you." Releasing her aura, she continued, "Feel the power that surrounds you. Deus, let your true potential awaken." She extended her hand toward him. "If you stay and follow the great moon's will, your long-awaited vengeance will be yours." From behind Deus, a purple thread-like aura began to emerge. Holding a letter in her hand, Utia whispered, "It's time to deliver the first response to the letters of the great moon, at dawn." The next morning, inside the Palatio mansion, Alon was still busy searching for clues about the third boss of Psychedelia when Evan burst through the door, shouting, "We have a big problem. That bastard—" "What do you mean?" Alon asked. "The second young master, Tonio. He's dead," Evan said grimly. Later, at Tonio's funeral, their father stood beside 2 of his mistresses. Alon sighed deeply, thinking how chaotic their family truly was. It felt like a scene straight out of a dark fantasy game, but something about Tonio's death was off. In the original Psychedelia story, it was supposed to be Leo who killed Tonio to claim the position of family head. Trembling and weeping as he said, "After all these years, I finally killed him." Yet now, Leo's expression was one of hidden satisfaction, joy masked behind a facade of mourning. Alon realized that Leo, or perhaps his men, must have been behind Tonio's death. Still, it didn't matter for now. What mattered was continuing the search for the 5 great sins. A year later, after the Palladio family's power struggle ended, Leo had completely absorbed Tonio's drug operations. With the rivalry gone, peace finally returned to their lands. In the present, Alon and Utia had become pen pals. Alon believed that maintaining their correspondence would be valuable in the long run. Based on Utia's letters, he could tell that the children were still pure-hearted. Noticing the list of new sponsors mentioned in her letter, Alon asked Evan if the orphanage's sponsors had increased again. "It's nice to see that our little orphanage keeps gaining support," he remarked. Evan nodded in agreement, saying it was a good sign. Then he mentioned receiving new information from the Information Guild about Alon's search. "Good," Alon replied, thinking it might finally be a lead about the ancient tome connected to the third boss. At last, he felt he was getting closer to finding the third boss of Psychedelia. Everything, it seemed, was falling into place. That night, Alon smiled faintly and murmured, "What a peaceful night." Meanwhile, at a drug distribution site in Margot, a man commented, "The eldest son of the Palladio family is truly generous." Another man with long hair nodded, saying that because of Leo, their organization had grown to hundreds of members. But their conversation abruptly stopped when they saw their comrades lying lifeless on the ground. Some were trembling uncontrollably, while others had blades pressed against their own throats. The man with long hair looked around in horror as the others suddenly began stabbing themselves. In a dark alley, a cloaked figure stood watching, Deus. Using his strings, he made the corpses dance like puppets. Utia appeared beside him, silently observing, and smiled. "A puppet show under the moonlight," she said. "How beautiful. It seems our orphanage will be gaining a few more sponsors after this." The sponsors she referred to were none other than the criminals they had slain. Deus asked her what meaning their actions truly held. Instead of answering, Utia asked, "Do you pity them?" "No," Deus replied coldly. "The ones we kill are criminals who destroy lives with their drugs. I'm just not sure if this really brings us closer to vengeance." Utia smiled softly. "It does," she said. "This is the foundation of the world we're rebuilding, the preparation for his return. We must cleanse this world for the coming of the great moon." Deus nodded slowly. "I understand now." Moments later, as they departed, a massive explosion engulfed the area. From above, Utia looked down and said, "Everything unfolds according to the will of the great moon. Our blue moon shall become its sword." On the ground below, a chilling mark was left behind, a vast symbol of an eye, and at its center, the image of the moon. After 2 years of constant letter exchanges between Utia and Alon, Evan came running, breathless, as he searched for his master. A few moments later, he found him in the backyard. "So you're here, master," Evan said. But before he could say another word, his strength gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. Lying there, he still managed a faint smile and said, "The 5th child is safe. I brought him to the orphanage." An indescribable joy filled Aelin's chest. After all these years, the 5 children, the ones he called the 5 great sins, were finally under his protection. He immediately invited Evan to eat. As Evan eagerly devoured the food Alon tossed him, the latter found himself deep in thought. He remembered how difficult it had been to find the 3rd child, the sin of greed. But thanks to his knowledge of the game, Psychedelia, and Evan's tireless efforts, they had finally succeeded. While Evan continued eating, Alon spoke softly. "You've really worked hard." Since Evan had been traveling from place to place for years, Alon told him to rest. But Evan asked, "Master, are my missions for the orphanage finally done?" When Alon confirmed it, Evan let out a long sigh of relief. As he lay down on the grass, he turned his head and asked, "Then why do you look unhappy, master?" "I'm happy," Alon replied. But to Evan, his master didn't look happy at all, even though his mission was complete. "See, I'm smiling," Alon joked, forcing a grin. Evan could only smile back in return. When Alon finally laid down beside him, he realized that everything had turned out better than he expected. He hadn't imagined that everything would unfold according to plan. He had once told us that the bosses in Psychedelia became the 5 great sins because of the tragedies they endured. Although those events happened before their eventual awakening, Alon knew how slim the chances were to save those children before their suffering began. At first, he had feared they might be too far gone before he could even reach them. He then asked about the orphanage. Evan handed him a letter and reported that everything was running smoothly, just as before. The children who once looked like broken dolls were now full of life. "I see," Alon said. "Then I guess I don't need to hire a teacher after all." He didn't expect Utia to handle the orphanage so well. Perhaps it was because in the game, Utia had always been naturally connected to such places. Evan then asked, "Is there something special in Utia's letter, master?" According to the letter, everyone in the orphanage was healthy and doing well, and Alan had nothing to worry about. Utia also mentioned that even the newly arrived children had adjusted quickly. Alon smiled faintly. It's comforting to know they're all safe and well. Yet in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder. He never thought it was possible for the 5 great sins to grow up as normal children. Perhaps the environment truly shaped who a person became. Evan then asked when Alon planned to visit them, since every time he asked before, Alon would only say, "It's not yet time." Alon turned his gaze away, avoiding the question. The truth was, he had no intention of seeing them face to face. He thought it was better to keep their bond through letters. But every time he remembered the tragedies that shaped those children, the very pain that turned them into the 5 great sins, he couldn't help but feel afraid. Though he hoped they had changed, part of him still trembled at the thought of what they might become. Covering his mouth, Alon said quietly, "The time will come. Maybe 5 years from now. For now, all I can do in this world is to keep improving myself." He wanted to become strong enough to protect himself. He knew that mastering magic required talent, and surprisingly, the body he now inhabited seemed to possess that gift. As he continued training, Evan suddenly asked, "Master, have you heard of the Blue Moon?" Alon shook his head. "No. This is my first time hearing about it." Evan explained that the Blue Moon was a rapidly rising organization dedicated to eradicating criminal groups across the land. "If that's their goal, then it's a noble one," Alon replied. But in his mind, he thought, Blue Moon wasn't part of the story of psychedelia. Perhaps they would eventually disappear like the other side characters. Then Evan added, "But master, they also kill nobles." "I thought you already knew." Alon's expression darkened. "From now on," he said, "your room will be beside mine. You'll be sleeping there." Back at the orphanage, Utia and the children gathered for their weekly Blue Moon activity report. "Is the northern mission done?" Utia asked. "No problems there. I beheaded all the slave traders," she answered. This girl was Seal Rang, the sin of pride. "No one discovered me," Seal Rang continued, "thanks to Rhine's disguise. Before killing the traders, I gave them a chance. I told them they'd live if they could guess the color of my eyes." She smirked. "No one guessed correctly." "I already dissolved all the bodies Seal Rang left behind," said another girl, Rhine, the sin of greed. Then a boy with white hair spoke. "My mission in the south is also complete. No trace remains of Avalon's illegal bioweapon lab. He was Radan, the sin of austerity." Utia smiled. "Good. Everything proceeds according to the will of the Great Moon." Then she added solemnly, "We exist only for the Great Moon." Unbeknownst to Elon, the children he once saved were now the very leaders of the Blue Moon, an organization that worshipped the Great Moon, and the Great Moon they spoke of was none other than Alon himself. "We have a small problem," said Deos suddenly. Utia's face hardened. "A problem? The will of the Great Moon is perfect." Deus showed her a letter and said that the leader of Avalon is the eldest son of Palatio family where the Great Moon reside. Utia's eyes burned with fury as Deus said that their target is our Great Moon. Her aura flared violently, striking fear into her comrades. After she read the order to poison Alon after the ailing count dies, a wave of anger consumed her, and with a trembling hand she crushed the letter, while continuously exerting her power. 2 years later, Count Palladio, Alon's father, was dead. Officials claimed it was a heart attack, but Alon knew better. It was drug abuse. As he stood over his father's lifeless body, Leo's attendant approached to report. "Blue Moon again," Leo muttered coldly, seemingly unfazed by their father's death. "Yes, sir," said the attendant. "They launched a surprise attack last night." Alon noticed that Leo seemed more concerned about the Blue Moon than their father's passing. The funeral ended without a single tear or sign of grief. As they left, Leo shot Alon a resentful glare. The next day, Evan asked, "What are your plans now, master?" "Your brother will be the new family head next year." "Why are you packing?" "You should pack too," Alon replied. "We're leaving the mansion." "You mean leaving the family's territory?" Evan asked. "Not exactly," said Alon. "Just the mansion." And when Evan asked where they were headed, Alon answered, "Rodmill." As their carriage rolled away, he explained that Rodmill was a small village in the southern part of Palatio territory. From the mansion's balcony, Leo watched them depart, his eyes burning with anger. In Rodmill, life was quiet and peaceful for Alon and Evan, but only 3 days later, that peace was shattered. Leo Palladio was dead. Alon couldn't believe it. He was forced to return to the place he called the murderous house. Unlike their father's death, Leo's body bore a stab wound to the chest. Staring at his brother's corpse, Alon wondered who could have done it. When he turned to question a servant, the man trembled in fear and shouted, "Forgive me, master!" Before averting his gaze, another servant quickly rushed over and dragged him away. Seeing the strange fear in everyone's eyes, doubt filled Alon's mind. Evan stepped closer and whispered, "Master, is it true? Were you the one behind the disappearance of the Avalon members last night?" Alon fell silent. When he looked around, every servant turned their eyes away, terrified of him. Meanwhile, not long after Alon left their family estate to head toward Rodmill, Evan asked why they didn't just move to a big city instead of a small village. Alon didn't answer immediately. Deep inside, he knew that wasn't an option. Because from the very beginning, Rodmill had always been the final destination of his plan. It was the one place where he could live peacefully and quietly, far from the chaos of the world. He thought about how he had already saved the 5 great sins from their destined downfall, and prevented the world's destruction that would have occurred in the coming years. Besides, the Palladio family owned a villa in Rodmill, and since that place didn't exist in the original story of Psychedelia, he knew it was the safest location for him to live freely as a noble. Eventually, Alon simply said that everything happens for a reason, including his decision to live in Rodmill. But Evan didn't believe him. He knew that whenever Alon refused to tell the truth, he would always come up with an excuse that sounded wise, but hollow. At the same time, as Leo watched Alon's carriage fade into the distance, he found himself torn. Should he kill his brother or not? He reasoned that Alon was useless anyway, whether he lived or died. There was even a time when Leo considered poisoning him after their father's death. But since Alon had already chosen to leave on his own, Leo thought there was no longer any point in killing him. Still, an unexplainable irritation stirred within him. He wondered if that unease stemmed from the growing troubles Avalon, their organization, had been facing in recent days. Even without a clear reason to harm his brother, Leo called for Alman and ordered him to follow Alon's carriage. Alman asked carefully if Leo meant for him to assassinate Alon. Leo frowned at the question, puzzled. Alman had always been loyal and unquestioning in his service, so Leo was surprised that he would even dare to ask. Sternly, Leo reminded him that his only duty was to obey. But before Leo could say another word, Alman drove his sword straight through Leo's chest. In his final moments, Leo weakly asked why Alman had betrayed him. With a calm smile, Alman replied that he enjoyed the thrill of war games and had truly taken pleasure in serving Leo. But now, he said, it was time to end the game. The narrator revealed that Alman was actually Haydn, the right hand of Leo and a secret operative of the Blue Moon organization. Haydn explained that they were taught by the Red Moon that the Blue Moon existed as the sword of the Great Moon. Because of that, they acted according to the Great Moon's will. However, if anyone dared to harm the Great Moon, they were granted permission to act freely, following their own judgment. As Leo collapsed, Haydn added that he had been waiting for years to hear those exact words come from Leo's mouth. He never expected it would take 2 years before Leo would finally order the death of their Great Moon. Leo weakly responded that Haydn's betrayal would not go unpunished, that their comrades would never forgive him. But Haydn merely smirked and said that, because of Leo's own command, the Avalon organization would now vanish forever from the continent. Before drawing his final breath, Leo heard Haydn's cold remark that Alon's departure from their home had been the Great Moon's way of sparing Leo's life, yet he had wasted that mercy. In the present, Alon once again wondered why everyone around him was acting so strangely. A chill ran down his spine, and his body tensed as if a heavy fog had descended upon him. Evan quietly asked again when Alon had supposedly become the mastermind behind the annihilation of Avalon's members. A moment later, the two sat together in the corner. Alon, trembling, pleaded for Evan to explain everything clearly, to help him understand how he had suddenly become the alleged mastermind. Evan explained that Alon was the only one who had gained anything from the events that had transpired. At the time Leo was killed, Alon had conveniently left the mansion. Because of this, many began to suspect that Alon had both the strongest motive and the perfect alibi, marking him as the successor, and possibly the true mastermind behind it all. Alon was stunned, realizing that everyone truly believed he was responsible for Leo's death. Evan continued, saying that with Avalon now wiped out, no one could stand against his master anymore. However, the string of deaths, their father, Leo, and their other relatives, had led many to believe that Alon had orchestrated everything from the shadows, and remarked that it almost felt as if Alon were some kind of commander-level swordmaster assassin. Hearing this, Alon held his head in frustration, wondering where to even begin. In his mind, there was no organization in Psychedelia capable of eradicating underworld powers in such a short time. That's when he remembered what Evan had mentioned before, about a certain group. When he asked if Evan was referring to the Blue Moon, Alon immediately confirmed it, and asked if he believed they were behind everything. Evan shook his head. Based on the Information Guild's reports, it was unlikely to be Blue Moon. Whenever Blue Moon executed their missions, they left no corpses behind. Only a single symbol marked the scene. But in Avalon's case, the members were brutally slain by swords, and the place looked like a scene straight from hell. Alon shuddered. So that's why they're calling me the mastermind with a sword master, huh? He murmured bitterly. He thought about it again. There was no blue moon in Psychedelia. It simply didn't exist. That meant it was impossible for them to be responsible. Moreover, the weak characters that appeared before the main story began couldn't possibly have done this, which left one question echoing in his mind. If not them, then who? Meanwhile, back at the orphanage, Yutia asked if they had left any traces behind. Ryan immediately replied that they hadn't. Even Seolrang made sure that nothing identifiable was left, except for the mangled corpses of the Avalon members she had slaughtered. When Deus arrived, he reported that only 486 Avalon members remained. Then Radon entered and calmly stated that, as ordered, he had already used his sword to cut them all down. Yutia praised them for their work, narrating that Avalon, the largest organization in the entire Astelia kingdom, had been completely annihilated within 5 days. Radon then mentioned that their purge wasn't entirely perfect. Yutia asked what he meant, and Radon presented a document listing nobles affiliated with Avalon. Included in the list was the family of Duke Altia, one of the most influential houses connected to the group. As Yutia quietly read the document, she said that everyone already knew what she intended. Her comrades nodded, and Radon volunteered to handle it personally. Yutia approved with a single nod. She then turned to Rhine and asked if there would be any issues with the Information Guild. Reen assured her that everything was fine. The guild believed that Blue Moon had nothing to do with the massacre. Deus added that all the guilds shared the same belief, even calling the incident a living hell created by a sword master. Reen asked whether they should continue monitoring the guild's activities. Yutia firmly said yes. She reminded everyone that the Great Moon must never find out that Blue Moon was behind the destruction of Avalon, as it hadn't been his command. As she always emphasized, they only acted according to the Great Moon's will. Deus hesitated before confessing that his own brother had once tried to harm the Great Moon, forcing them to protect him, but Yutia corrected him. It was not the Great Moon's command that drove their actions this time. She reminded them all that as the sword of the Great Moon, they must not act without his explicit permission. We exist only to carry out his will, she declared, and we must never let him down. Sweat trickled down Deus's neck as he wondered why someone as powerful as Yutia seemed uneasy. Deep within, he feared the truth, that perhaps the Great Moon already knew everything they had done. Meanwhile, inside Alon's study, books and papers were scattered across his desk. He explained that a month had passed since Leo's burial, and he still hadn't had a proper rest because of endless work. All he wanted was to play games and eat, just like an ordinary noble. He recalled that even though Leo had countless enemies, the original story said he was supposed to die 6 years later. But because events had changed, Alon was now the only surviving successor of the Palatio family, and all the burdens had fallen on him. A few moments later, several officials entered carrying stacks of additional documents. Alon frowned, wondering why everyone suddenly seemed so hard-working when they used to be lazy while his father was alive. He could see the fear in their eyes. They whispered nervously to each other, unsure if their young master was angry. Deep down, they all thought it was better to overwork than to risk their lives. None of them wanted to die. Alon sighed. Perhaps they were so diligent now because of the rumors labeling him as the mastermind behind all the deaths. In truth, though, he was nothing more than a former corporate slave who just wanted a peaceful life. Later that night, Evan remarked that, strange as it sounded, Alon's progress was incredible. He had reached the 2nd tier of magic in just 2 years, without a teacher. Evan called it true talent and asked when exactly Alon had become so strong. He explained that under normal circumstances, it took about 4 years to reach the 2nd tier, even with guidance. After all, magic couldn't be mastered easily, even by those born with aptitude. Alon simply replied that he probably just had decent talent. In his mind, he knew the truth. His chaotic thoughts and the fear of being powerless had driven him to train relentlessly. The technique he practiced required perfect control over one's mana. But what was the point of control if his mana pool was so small? At first, he had been thrilled to discover he could actually use magic in a fantasy world. After completing his mission involving the 5 great sins, he thought he could finally live safely, and devoted himself to learning magic. Yet now, desperate to survive, he realized that his mana capacity was terribly low. No matter how hard he trained, his power remained limited. Alon explained that a person's mana hole was like an athlete's weight class. His, unfortunately, was tiny, and if he wanted to expand it, there was only one possible method. When Alon sat down, Evan immediately showed the ball invitation for his master. Alon stared silently at the envelope, wondering what kind of trouble it would bring this time. In the next scene, Alon and Evan arrived at an extravagant ball. But after just a few minutes of walking around, Alon sighed and said he was already tired. He explained that it was just a typical gathering where nobles came to socialize, held in the southern region of Estelia Kingdom. Since he was soon to become a count, he needed to use this opportunity to form new connections. He knew that building relationships with other nobles was essential for a peaceful future. However, every time he tried to approach someone, they would quickly retreat, visibly nervous. When he tried greeting one man, the noble turned pale and ran off. Evan chuckled, telling him not to be too hard on himself. But Alon merely shrugged. He wasn't angry, he had expected this reaction. "Let's just head back," he muttered. As they walked out, he reflected that it was obvious the nobles wouldn't talk to him. Unlike his great-grandfather's era, the Palatio name no longer commanded respect. Now they were branded as the degenerates of the East, a disgrace among noble families. Still, Alon hadn't come without a plan. He intended to charm the nobles through his learned social skills. He approached a woman and said politely, "Your wine tastes quite extraordinary." But to her, his tone sounded unnerving, almost menacing. When Alon added that he wished to take home a few bottles, she panicked even more. Alon smiled, thinking that smiling would help make him seem friendly. But instead, the woman screamed and ran off, shouting that she would tell her father he was demanding their family's wine. Soon, rumors spread across the ballroom that Alon Palatio had threatened a lady just to obtain a limited edition wine. Others whispered that he was worse than his so-called degenerate siblings. Alon fell silent. This wasn't the outcome he had planned. Evan chuckled again to Alon, while Alon tried to convince himself that perhaps the girl was just shy, too flustered to admit the truth. He continued trying to mingle, but Evan noticed something strange. The more Alon tried to talk to people, the more gifts he received instead. "My spoils of war," Evan joked, "just keep piling up. The nobles you're trying to talk to keep giving me things. Paldean luxury horses, Pania Mandarin tea, Vilanda crafted metalwork, Malentino specialty wine." Hearing that, Alon slumped in the corner, utterly defeated. All his efforts to study noble etiquette had gone to waste. He realized that the Palatio family was even more infamous than he thought. And with the rumors branding him as Leo's killer, everyone was terrified of him. After a while, Alon excused himself, telling Evan he needed some air. As he stepped outside, he didn't notice that a young woman inside the ballroom was watching him intently. Her eyes followed him as he disappeared through the doorway. Outside, as the night breeze brushed against him, Alon sighed, wondering where exactly he had gone wrong. Then suddenly a gentle voice spoke behind him. "May I have a word with you, even for a moment?" Alon turned around, unsure if the voice was directed at him or who it belonged to. A young girl stepped forward. "It's me," she said softly. "I'm Roria, the third daughter of Duke Altia." Alon greeted her politely, instantly recalling that the Altia family was one of the three great masterminds of psychedelia, the so-called madmen of the North. He wondered what she could possibly want with someone like him. He couldn't even remember her from the game, no matter how many times he replayed it. But before he could ask, Roria spoke directly, her tone calm yet unwavering. "I'll be honest with you," she said. "Lend me your strength, because soon I'm going to be assassinated." Because of the young girl's beautiful face and the pitiful way she pleaded with Alon, he couldn't help but think that perhaps he had inherited his father's weakness for women. Roria then revealed that she was still under the protection of his father's mistress. However, the Duke of Altia's condition had grown critical, and she feared that once her father died, her siblings would surely kill her. From this, Alon realized that Roria's true motive was survival. He also understood why he couldn't remember her from the game, most likely because she had already died long before Psychedelia's story even began. Roria begged him once more. She claimed that if Alon lent her his power, her siblings would never dare touch her. Her voice trembled with desperation as she pleaded, but Alon firmly refused. Still, Roria was not done. She declared that she wasn't asking for his help for free. If Alon helped her, she would offer half of the Altia family's wealth in return. Alon didn't answer. Instead, he simply turned and began to walk away, saying that their conversation was over. He had somewhere else to be. In his mind, he thought it was already hard enough keeping himself alive. He didn't need to involve himself in another family's problem. Even if he wanted to help her, he knew the rumors about him having special powers were nothing but baseless talk. Before leaving, Alon quietly looked at Roria's sorrowful face, sighed, and said, "Something good will happen to you." Deep down, he hoped she'd find a real ally within her own family. Meanwhile, as Alon re-entered the hall, a shadowy figure hidden in the darkness spoke. One of the Altia family members had apparently approached the Great Moon, and this had to be reported to the Red Moon immediately. The Great Moon commented that something good was bound to happen to Roria. The Red Moon referred to Utia. However, Rhine argued that there was no need to inform Utia. According to their data, Roria was the only one uninvolved in the Avalon incident, meaning she was not one of Radan's targets. That makes things easier, said Deus, because aside from Roria, we're ordered to eliminate every remaining member of the Altia family. Rhine nodded and added that, for the Red Moon's command, Utia's order, they must prevent any information leaks to ensure the Great Moon would never learn that the Blue Moon had ties to the Avalon incident. Thus, they continued to observe and monitor Alon's every move from the shadows. As Alon walked through the Grand Hall, he wondered to himself, do I have some kind of invisible barrier? He noticed that no one dared approach him, until a woman suddenly greeted him, someone who had been watching him for quite some time. For a moment, Alon felt relieved. Finally, someone had spoken to him. Maybe, he thought, this was his chance to have a genuine noble friend. He smiled and greeted her back, but when he turned to see her face, he stopped in his tracks and muttered under his breath, another shady one. Once again, he thought that everyone who approached him first seemed to be far from normal. Still, he stepped closer and politely greeted her. Good evening, Lady Zenonia. Hearing her name, the woman asked if he knew her. Alon replied, of course, who wouldn't recognize the famous Lady Zenonia? In his mind, he recalled the three great villainous houses of the Estelia kingdom, the Altia family of the north, the Palatio family of the east, and the degenerates of Zenonia in the west. The woman before him was Kalia, the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia. She asked if she was really that famous. In Alon's mind, if his Palotia family was like a gang, the Zenonia family was like a corporate syndicate, and immediately reminded himself not to get involved with Kelia, because all he wanted was simple connection enough to live a peaceful life. He then added that Kalia wasn't only famous for her family name, but also for her beauty. Kalia smiled and thanked him for the compliment, saying she wanted to talk longer. She asked if he'd be willing to continue their conversation. Alon replied that he'd like that, but there were too many eyes watching them. Inwardly, he was practically praying that Kalia would let him go. The woman paused, folded her fan, and looked him in the eye. You really are just like the rumors say, she said softly before turning away. Alon stood there, puzzled. What did she mean by that? And why would she want to talk to me? He thought. On the far end of the hall, Rhine reported that the information about the Avalon incident had been fully contained. But Deus turned sharply toward the window and muttered, we have a new problem. Someone is tailing Alon from a tree outside the hall. Rhine calmly replied, we haven't received any orders regarding anyone following the Great Moon. For now, we keep watching. But if necessary, we eliminate them. Under the faint glow of the moonlight, the Hidden Watchers continued their silent vigil, unaware that Alon, the center of all their attention, remained oblivious to the web of eyes surrounding him. Days later, Evan asked Alon if he was certain this was the place he had been searching for. The canyon looked terrifying, its interior dark even beneath the noon sun, but Alon said nothing. Deep inside, he knew he had finally found his true objective. The place looked exactly like it did in the game. If this one's wrong too, I'm going to be seriously disappointed, said Evan. Alon smirked. This time, it's real. He remembered how easy this place was to find in the game, but now it felt entirely different. The reason he came here secretly was because of the labyrinth in the south, known in psychedelia as the Labyrinth of Whispers. According to him, those who solved the riddles in all 8 chambers would be rewarded with a powerful artifact. With his sharp memory of the game, he felt this was the perfect time to relive the thrill of being a level 1 adventurer again. When they reached a massive stone gate, Alon couldn't believe his eyes. To see this place in real life felt surreal. He used to hate this dungeon in the game, yet standing before it now filled him with awe. It looks man-made, Evan observed. But how did you even know about this place? I used to come here often, Alon slipped up. Really? Evan frowned. Just kidding, Alon said quickly, forcing a grin. I have my own ways of knowing. Come on, let's head inside. Evan sighed. Next time, don't joke like that. With a face that serious, it's hard to tell. As soon as they entered, flying monsters swarmed them. Anyone caught by the enormous hands within the chamber was crushed instantly. Looks like it'll smash us flat if we get a riddle wrong, said Evan nervously. But Alon remained calm, solving each riddle with precision. Evan could only watch in silence, wondering how his young master could stay so composed in such a terrifying place. He had served Alon for 4 years. Yet he still couldn't understand what went on inside his master's head, or how he even knew about this dungeon when he rarely left home. I've solved all the riddles, Alon said after a while, but the door hasn't opened yet. It seems the hands have to finish off the monsters first. Evan thought to himself that despite his young master's mysterious nature, his plans always seemed to work out. As the great door finally began to open, Evan wondered, what could my master be planning this time? Alon felt a rush of excitement as the stone slabs shifted. If he had stayed a moment longer, he might have thrown up. The brutality of this dungeon was overwhelming, and he forced himself not to look at the scattered remains of monsters. When the gate finally opened, piles of treasure awaited them. Evan was stunned. "Are we done here?" he asked. "Almost," Alon replied. "I just need the black ring, then we leave." While Evan clutched bars of gold in disbelief, he asked, "That's it? Just that old ring? It doesn't even look valuable." Alon smiled faintly. "Everything else here only brings trouble. The black ring is all I need." He slipped it onto his thumb and whispered, "Finally, the constraint." As they stepped out of the chamber, Alon reassured Evan, "Don't worry, there's no more danger outside." But the moment they exited, Evan broke into a cold sweat. You didn't expect this too, right? The canyon walls. They're all golems!" He drew his sword in panic, thinking Alon hadn't realized the danger. "I have to protect him," he thought. Yet Alon calmly walked ahead. "This time," he said softly, "I'll handle it. I don't know what you're planning, but we need to escape," Evan shouted. But Alon kept walking, unbothered by the approaching golems. "My second-tier magic won't be enough against them," Evan cried. But before he could act, Alon raised his hand and uttered, "Constraint, commence." In an instant, time itself froze within the canyon. A mysterious voice echoed in the air. "Fragment inheriting the great will of Nyarlala. Speak now the 2 constraints you can enact." Alon remembered this scene vividly from Psychedelia. 2 selection windows appeared here. The voice belonged to the constraint, the reward granted for clearing the labyrinth. Just like in the game, it was an absorption-type artifact that granted immense power in exchange for self-imposed limitations. As the voice spoke, Alon's body trembled. Everything felt painfully real. Clutching his chest, he steadied himself and answered, "In all spellcasting, the hand seals of Babylonia shall be absolutely required." He formed a complex gesture. The voice asked for the power he sought in return. "Power to twist the laws of the world a little further," Alon declared. It was granted. "Second," the voice intoned. "In all spellcasting," Alon continued, "only the sacred words of Babylonia may be used." "And what will you claim in exchange?" the voice asked again. The same as before. Silence filled the canyon. For a moment, Alon wondered if he had done something wrong. He even mimicked the skill icon from the game just to be sure. "Choosing both seals and words gives the highest possible magic output," he murmured. He had mastered every sign and incantation. This had to work. Finally, the voice spoke once more. "We accept it. Human who remembers the seals and mysteries of the forgotten great god. We offer our gratitude to you who carry on his will." "Carry on his will?" Alon whispered, confused. As the black ring melted into his skin, a faint smile formed on his lips. His plan had succeeded. For the last time, the voice echoed, "We are always watching you, inheritor of the will." And before the golems could fully reach them, Evan once again shouted that his second-tier magic wouldn't be enough to defeat them. Yet Alon remained calm, his gaze steady as he watched the massive creatures approach. He thought to himself that the lightning sphere, something that should have been shining brilliantly by now, was still weak, even after he had poured every drop of mana he had left. No matter how hard he trained, this was his limit. As he gathered the crackling sphere of lightning between his hands, he whispered, "It's time to test the constraint, and the price it demands." In an instant, the sphere of lightning in Alon's hand refracted, light bending and splitting until a violent rebound followed, its energy compressing, then expanding again into a more ferocious, more concentrated orb of electricity. A blinding flash erupted from his palm, and when the light subsided, the lightning sphere had transformed into a larger, deeper blue mass of raw power. With rapid, precise movements, Alon began a flurry of complex hand incantations known as linear diffraction. He released the attack. The spell shot forward in a streak of blinding light, striking the golems head-on. In moments, the entire field was engulfed in roaring thunder and crackling blue lightning that tore through stone and earth alike. The air shook. The golems' bodies sizzled and fractured under the violent energy that consumed them. Evan could only stare, speechless, as the blinding storm continued to rage. When the final sparks faded and the last echo of thunder fell silent, the golems shattered all at once, crumbling into dust that scattered through the smoky air. As the dust settled, Evan let out a curse under his breath, still stunned by what he had just witnessed. He turned to Alon, disbelief written across his face. "Have you been hiding your real power this whole time?" he demanded, but Alon shook his head. "Impossible," he replied calmly. Evan frowned. "Impossible? In 15 years as a mercenary, I've never seen an attack like that. Don't tell me what you just did was second-tier magic?" When Alon nodded, Evan fell silent. His gaze lingered on the man before him, someone who, only moments ago, had unleashed power far beyond comprehension. Yet Alon himself looked equally puzzled. He didn't understand it either, why his spell had grown so strong. In the game, It had never been like this. Alon then spoke as if explaining to himself. In Psychedelia's turn-based system, spells can be enhanced per turn using sigils and incantations. The spell he used, Chain Lightning, normally gains strength through sigils and 4 incantations, stacking its power. When combined, those sigils create a configuration meant for large-scale lightning magic. He paused, still processing the devastation before them. The trade-off is that each spell requires both a sigil and an incantation to cast. But in return, it multiplies the spell's power several times over. Maybe that's why his attack went beyond what he expected. Even with that explanation, he knew the truth. It still felt like overkill. A second-tier spell shouldn't have had that kind of force. The results far exceeded Alon's expectations, shocking even him. Once they left the area, Evan slumped down, drained. This was harder than an actual battle, he muttered bitterly. Who in the world designed a place like that? Alon didn't respond right away. Then he remembered, the Whispering Labyrinth. That wasn't its real name, only what the community had come to call it based on shared maps and old guidebooks. Its true name was the Labyrinth of Palaon. It was created by someone named Palaon, Alon finally said. Evan blinked. Palaon? What are you talking about? Alon didn't answer. Instead, he pulled Evan up and said, Let's head back east. There's something I need to do. Evan groaned but followed, muttering that Alon was far too diligent for his own good. As they walked, Alon explained that choosing the right sigil to match a spell's element enhanced its potency, and the proper incantation improved its properties further. That's how the system worked in the game. But unlike the game, where only damage numbers changed and visuals stayed the same, in reality, every sigil now visibly reshaped the spell itself. He realized that every incantation he had spoken earlier had physically altered the lightning's behavior. Alon then think that even if it's just a magic technique, could it be that his mana control is exceptional to perceive those changes? When they reached the place where they had left their horses, Alon sighed, thinking that once he recovers his mana, he needs to test it again. Alon then think that in the end, things have turned well for both of them. But neither of them noticed the figure watching them from afar. Rhine. After overhearing their conversation, she swiftly leapt across the hills and returned to the labyrinth. Once inside, she began tracing her fingers along the carvings on the wall. The words read, The Age of Forgotten Outer Gods. Her eyes widened. This was the ancient script of the Alanef Empire. Then, further down the wall, she read another inscription. For a friend who would be left alone, the swordmaster Palaon stood his ground. She whispered. He repelled the invasion of the Black Ones, and defeated Alakolaka, the devourer of his people's hearts, the radiant emperor. The great Palaon. I know this story, Rhine murmured, because I was born under the Great Mission within the ancient library. Having heard Alon name Palaon as the labyrinth's creator, she realized that something about all this didn't align with history. The Bloodia Queen, she's different from what was recorded. But what shocked her most was that the Great Moon herself had once called Palaon a friend worthy of reverence. And more than that, the incantations Alon used weren't found anywhere in the ancient library's records. Who exactly is he? She whispered. When Rhine exited the labyrinth, her face flushed with unease. The Red Moon was right, she muttered. Everything she said is true, and I'm ashamed for blindly following orders. Then, sensing someone approach, she turned. Deus, she greeted sharply. Did you get the information we needed? Deus shook his head. No. The man I was tracking is dead. Before I could reach him, his neck twisted twice in midair, snapped instantly. Rhine's eyes narrowed. Then I'll report this to Utia. She'll handle it properly. Meanwhile, at the Zenonia Count's estate, Kalia sat quietly, deep in thought. The rumors she'd heard about Alon, it seemed they weren't just rumors after all. His gaze, she recalled, was cold, distant, like staring into the depths of the abyss. She remembered him saying she was famous, and she realized he was right. The Zenonia family was both powerful and well-known. But what puzzled her was how someone like her, who rarely socialized, became so recognized. She looked at her father and asked, Isn't it strange? You're the Count after all. But with a snap of his fingers, dark energy flickered around him. His pupils turned black before returning to normal, and he resumed his work without a word. Kalia smiled faintly. No one would ever suspect, she whispered, that I'm the one truly running this house while my father plays the fool. Then her thoughts returned to Alon. How did he know? He had mentioned many eyes watching, and even her spy seemed to have been discovered. Suddenly, one of her men came running. Lady Kalia, please come to your room immediately. She followed him quickly. When they entered her chamber, her breath caught. Her spy lay dead on the floor. The man beside her said, the seal on his body didn't activate, so he must not have revealed anything. But Kalia's gaze hardened. He was placed here deliberately, she said coldly. They wanted me to find him. How did they learn that I'm the one running the Zenonia family? And as the thought sank in, her expression darkened. The moment I met Alon, she realized, I was already caught off guard. My greatest weakness was exposed. In the Duchy of Altia, the night was heavy with silence as Roria rode home in her carriage, lost in thoughts of the man the underworld had begun to whisper about, the one they called the noble of the underworld. She had seen the look in his eyes, cold and sharp, so much like her father's, and she knew deep within her that Alon Palatio was not a man to be trifled with. To her, he was both her only hope for survival and a living reminder of how powerless she had become. Her cowardly siblings had stripped her of everything, her fortune, her influence, her very dignity, until all that remained was her desperate will to live. She had clung to her father's affection as her last refuge, but with his health failing and death drawing near, she could no longer ignore the question that haunted her every waking moment. What would become of her once he was gone? That question found a terrible answer when she returned home. The servants met her at the door with trembling voices, telling her that Lady Ferrian and Lord Kig, her siblings who had once betrayed her, had taken their own lives. Her heart stopped as disbelief consumed her. The very people who had schemed against her family had ended themselves, leaving behind only confusion and unease. When she demanded to know where her remaining siblings, Timalian and Malian, were, the servants hurried to find them, only to discover the two standing lifeless in each other's embrace, each impaled upon the other's sword. The household erupted into chaos, and Roria could do nothing but stare as her world crumbled in ways she could not comprehend. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen by all, Rodin left quietly into the night. His mission to cleanse the Altia bloodline had been fulfilled. As the echoes of panic filled the mansion, Roria's mind drifted to Alon's words, how he once told her that good things would soon come her way. A chill ran through her as she began to piece together the unthinkable. Perhaps the man she had turned to for help had long been watching, waiting, his claws hidden beneath a calm exterior. Perhaps all of this had been part of his design. The realization that she might have entered a contract with something far beyond human sank into her bones. She knew there was no turning back now. The fate of those who had betrayed Aelin was already well known, and she could not risk joining their ranks. 2 months passed, and in the grand estate of the Palacio family, the Duke of Altia's butler arrived to deliver a gift to Aelon. Inside the ornate box was a bottle of Cernan's wine, worth thousands of gold coins, an extravagant treasure rarely seen even among nobles. Alon regarded the gift with quiet surprise, realizing it could only have come from Roria herself. A faint guilt stirred in him, for he had once refused to help her, and yet she had sent him such a token of gratitude. When the butler confirmed that the gift had been ordered by the new duke, Alon was struck by the truth. Roria, the youngest and weakest of her siblings, now stood as the head of House Altia. In her newly inherited office, Roria sat among the echoes of her father's legacy. The room, once forbidden to her, now belonged entirely to her. She reflected on how swiftly everything had changed. The death of her father, the mysterious suicides of her siblings, the ceremony that had thrust upon her the title of duke. She had managed to avoid suspicion. Her presence at a noble ball had provided the perfect alibi. Yet even now, she could not shake the feeling that someone else had orchestrated it all. Before her siblings' deaths, they had dismantled her secret organization, executing her loyal followers and leaving her powerless. When she returned home, she had been a mere shadow of herself. But in the aftermath, her enemies were dead, and her power was restored. It all aligned too neatly. Somewhere behind the scenes, Alon had moved the pieces. Outwardly, he had rejected her request for aid, but in silence, he had carried out every necessary step. She could only wonder how far ahead he had planned, how deep his schemes reached. She realized that Alon had not extended his hand out of pity, but because he needed the Altia Duchy for something greater. Even after she consolidated every remaining organization under her banner, their combined strength could not compare to the unseen influence that Alon commanded. She began to understand that the Palladio family's power in the underworld was built entirely through commerce and cunning. But there was something that Alon lacked, something only Altia possessed: prestige. And perhaps, she thought, that was what he desired all along. As her eyes lingered on her father's portrait, she steeled her heart. For now she would do what was necessary. The path she had chosen could no longer be undone. Her patron, Alon Palladio, would reach out again soon, and when he did, she would be ready. She hoped only that her gift had pleased him. At the Palatio estate, Alon sat in silence after the butler's departure. He could not shake the sense that something was amiss. Roria, once the helpless daughter surrounded by traitorous kin, now ruled as duke of one of the oldest duchies in the empire. Evan, observing his master, wondered why Alon's eyes had grown distant again, as if he were already calculating the next dozen moves ahead. Months passed, and the cold of winter crept over the land. 5 years before the beginning of the story that history would remember. Alon walked through the long corridors of his home, his mind filled with the rhythm of quiet contemplation. Though the formal succession ceremony had yet to occur, he had already acted as count for over a year. It was not a title he had ever wished to bear, yet he had grown accustomed to the responsibilities, and the privileges of nobility had become part of his daily life. His thoughts drifted when Evan handed him a letter from Utia. Inside his office, Alon inquired about the assassins who had taken the life of his brother, Leo. The investigation continued, but the truth remained elusive. Alon simply accepted it as one of the many uncertainties he had learned to anticipate. He had no desire for vengeance. He sought only to prepare for whatever unseen consequences his presence in this world might bring. He understood that every action he took rippled through time, altering destinies in ways the original game had never accounted for. Evan remarked that his master's thinking had already become that of a true count, though Aelin paid it little mind. Instead, his thoughts wandered to the orphanage he had quietly sponsored. The letters he exchanged with them each month had become a small light in his otherwise calculated life. He had never met the children in person, yet watching them grow from afar filled him with a strange, fatherly warmth. They were known as the 5 great sins, and though the world might one day call them monsters, to him they were simply children who had been given a chance to live. He asked how old they had become, realizing that most were now reaching the age where they could stand on their own. He decided it was time to send them out into the world. The thought of parting with them brought both pride and melancholy, as the image of innocent children in his care was replaced by that of young adults ready to forge their destinies. He believed that his efforts had been enough to prevent them from awakening as the sins of the original tale. Now, they would carve their own paths. Each had a gift: Utia for faith, Dias for the sword, Reen for inquiry, Seal Rang for combat, and Radan for apostleship. If placed in the right environment, they would thrive. Alon prepared letters for each of them, along with personal gifts to guide them on their journey. When the letters were done, he instructed Evan to deliver them all, his expression unreadable, though a faint smile crossed his face as he thought that their success might one day yield him something in return. At the orphanage, the children gathered in excitement as Utia announced the arrival of letters, one for each of them, sent by the man who had saved their lives. Seal Rung held her letter tightly, overjoyed, saying that it was the first time Alon had written to her personally. The others surrounded her, eyes gleaming with warmth and wonder as they traced their names on the envelopes. None of them could have imagined that their benefactor's careful guidance would one day set into motion the story that would change the world. If you enjoyed this chapter and want to see what happens next, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next update in this epic story.